In this episode, a paradise untouched by war until now. From the depths, obsidian ships rise, silent, unnatural, deadly. The Drukhari have come, and they bring only suffering. On the shore, Imperial forces lie in wait. Astartes Scouts, hardened guardsmen, and Arbites forces. Their mission? To turn hunters into prey. A sniper steadies his aim. A scout races against time. A battle-hardened marshal clashes with a cold and ruthless officer. And as the enemy closes in, the first shot is fired. The storm is here, and the killing is about to begin.
The sun hung high, its glare sharp against the endless blue of the ocean. Waves rolled onto the shore, frothing white over the fine sands, their rhythm steady, unbroken. It was a perfect day, the kind the galaxy seemed to forget still existed. Then the water stirred. From the depths dark ships emerged, their hulls cutting through the surf like obsidian blades, silent, unnatural. Encased in shimmering force fields, they broke through the surface, hovering just above the waves. The transparent barriers flickered, distorting the ocean's reflection for an instant before fading. Left behind were jagged silhouettes, sleek and lethal, slipping toward the shore without a sound. Drukhari, a tide of them, emerging like wraiths from the abyss. They stood motionless aboard their skimmers, their barbed armor merging with the cruel contours of their craft. Their weapons, wickedly curved and sculpted for pain, seemed almost sentient in their malice, yearning for the agony to come as keenly as their wielders. The sharp glint of serrated splinter rifles caught the sunlight, the ammunition chambers humming with barely contained venom. One among them exuded menace. He did not move, yet his presence loomed over his skin. His armor, adorned with jagged filigree, marked his station. His helmet, elongated into a leering demonic appearance, gave no hint of the face beneath. Only the dark violet horsetail trailing from the clasp moved, rustling in the wind like a herald of slaughter. With him stood another kind of horror, figures clad in sickly green, like an ailing haunted forest where the air itself is tainted. At first glance, the witches were alluring, gracefully standing, poised in the stillness before the kill. But closer scrutiny shattered the illusion. Their beauty was a deception, a mask stretched too thin over something grotesque. The eyes predatorial, cheekbones too sharp, the lips hiding vampiric fangs. Their skin bore an unnatural pallor, as though drained of life, yet still glistened with an eerie vitality. The raiders glided onto the beach, the force fields collapsing entirely. They skimmed over the sand-like specters, barely leaving a trace. No war cries, no howls of rage, only the quiet, deliberate advance of dark torture smiths. They did not search. They already knew where their prey was. The heat was suffocating. Even under the cover of the chaparral, the air was thick and stagnant, clinging to the skin like oil. The distant crash of waves did little to break the oppressive stillness. Danuta Krabafandra lay prone in the undergrowth, adjusting the scope on his snapper rifle with slow, meticulous movements. Sweat dripped from his brow, tracing lines through the dust caking his skin. He exhaled sharply. Omais na orbor. Sergeant Takamu Zardak Trelamus, crouched nearby, magnoculars pressed to his eyes, didn't look away from the horizon. His voice was dry as the dirt beneath them. What now? Thermoregulation. My Federisian blood doesn't tolerate this heat. Danuta muttered, resting his cheek against the rifle stock, eyes momentarily closed. Takamus coughed. You have as much Fenrisian blood in your body as I have Tyranid in mine. Bazu Kaptoriav snorted. Shandona Kurashan, the most promising of the neophytes, let out a short chuckle. A few Imperial Guard troopers concealed in a foliage nearby couldn't help but grin. It was surreal hearing Astartes bantering. Danutar's head snapped toward them. The moment his gaze fell upon the guardsmen, their laughter died in their throats. His face, craggy and scarred, was fringed by a thick white beard, his pale blue eyes cold as glacial runoff. "Something funny?" he rumbled. The mortals swallowed hard. One of them shifted uncomfortably but wisely kept silent. Danutar turned his head just enough to glance at Shandona over his shoulder. "And you're tight, Burton." His voice dropped to a growl. "Care to share the joke?" Shandona, partially hidden behind a bush, had a heavy boulder between his legs, barrel pointing safely upward. His smirk faded, but he didn't avert his gaze. "Nothing, brother." "Good." Danutar exhaled and turned back to his rifle. "I am of Fenrisian lineage," he continued, mostly to himself. "My great... We know, Danutar," Balzu interrupted. "We all know. You should be sharing the throne with our Sea Lord by now." "Shut it," Takama ordered. His tone was flat, but the others knew when playtime was over. "Kaptoriot, get me to Lord Denuno." "On it." "Denuno here," the Krekengard's voice came through, a low growl tempered by Vox distortion. A clipped, tribal-laced voice answered through the calm beat in his ear. "Any auger signals up there?" "Negative." Denuno's brow furrowed. "But keep your eyes open. We already know they shall examine detection systems." He turned from the data console, pacing toward the thick observation glass of the bridge. "What's your status?" "Men are in good morale now that we're here, praised your father. Sergeant Trelamus gave a rousing speech to the guardsmen en route. Confidence spread through the battalion once we secured a site." The Nuno allowed himself a slight private smirk. Trelamus had always been a pragmatist, but the man understood warriors, both Astartes and mortal alike. "Good," he paused. "Do not disappoint them. The guardsmen and Arbites have placed their faith in us. Confirm it with operational success and minimal casualties." "Of course, my lord. Over and out." The Vox link cut out with a static click. The Nuonor stood for a moment in silence, the hum of shift systems and the soft footfalls of Navy crewmen pressing behind him like a whisper against his thoughts. He stepped closer to the vast expanse of reinforced glass, his gaze falling upon the blue planet that dominated the void beyond. Aquila's 9. It was breathtaking, a world of sapphire oceans speckled with islands and sprawling continents untouched by millennia of war. It reminded him of Abyssalis, though the tides here were gentler and the currents kinder. A fleeting thought crossed his mind. The galaxy was still capable of beauty. In all the carnage, all the madness of the Long War, there remained places like this, unsullied, whole. He had seen too many such worlds fall to ruin, not this one. His gauntleted fingers pressed against the runed amulet in his chest plate, a weathered carved relic of cetacean bone, suspended over the Caribbean green of his armor, his father's parting gift. The thought of it anchored him, pulling him into stillness. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. "Old Father, who sittest upon the golden throne, hearken unto me, for I bow before thee. O Ras, my protector, send forth the spirit of our founding Fenris, that we may smite thy foes. Suffer not thine enemies to mock thy servants, for in us thou livest, and through us thy will is done. Grant unto us the strength of body, the wisdom of the hunt, and wills unbreakable as iron. Make our shots strike true, our blades swift, and let our brotherhood move as one, as shadow is to body." The new Nor remained still, head bowed, as the final words of his prayer settle in the ether, where gods and demons alike make their powers felt. Something stirred in his chest, not power, not psychic might, but the deep-rooted certainty that he had been heard. The warmth settled into his body, rolling from the crown of his head to the soles of his feet. When he finally opened his eyes, they burned with conviction. The enemy would come soon, and the Sea Raiders would be ready. "Open a channel with Svard," Takamo ordered, his voice low but firm. "Anu," Balzu answered in his native Abyssinian dialect, meaning right away. He adjusted his comms unit, a faint click sounding as the channel opened. A crisp voice answered almost instantly.
"Major Lucian Svard, over."
"This is Sergeant Trolamos, requesting status update, over." In the heart of the prefab command center, Major Lucian Svard stepped away from the hologram display, his expression unreadable as he turned from the gathered officers. Marshal Rask Overn, second in command of the Arbites contingent, barely spanned a Vox exchange a glance, focusing Stan on a series of data slates stacked before him. Svard moved into an adjacent room, a barren space save for a single window overlooking the Potemkin Colony. Outside, disguised Imperial troops played the part of settlers, men unloading supply crates, fueling construction vehicles, driving earth movers to rival terrain for roads that would never be built. A perfect illusion. Svard leaned back against the wall, tilting his head just enough for the afternoon sun to catch the edges of his precisely trimmed chevron mustache. He smirked. "The colony is busy," he said. "Captain Varro confirmed readiness 15 minutes ago."
"Praise the Emperor,"
Takamo responded, voice steady. "Indeed, Sergeant Trolamos." Svard's answer was flat, more acknowledgement than reverence. A pause followed, filled with Vox static and the distant murmur of activity behind him. "How are things from your position?" Takamo narrowed his eyes at nothing in particular. It is like the Major Stone. No weight, no gravity, no faith. A man without faith always found something else to put his trust in. His own power, intellect, cunning. Or worse, those of chaos. Men like Svard were dangerous in a different way than the Xenos. But Takamo had lived for over a century, and he knew how to hold his tongue.
"We're roasting nicely,"
Takamo finally replied.
"Shade's not doing much for us, Major." "Damn right we are."
Danutar grumbled from his position, shifting his rifle slightly.
"But we're ready. Spirits are high."
"Glad to hear it, Sergeant," Svard said. "Your team is the key to this. If you fail, this will all be for nothing."
"We won't."
A brief pause, then Svard added, almost casually, "Good luck, Sergeant." Luck? There was no such thing as luck, only fate dictated by the will of the Allfather. Takamo clenched his jaw slightly.
"Over and out."
The channel closed with a quiet click. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I hate that man," he muttered under his breath. "Marshal Orvan, I just spoke with Sergeant Trolamos. The Astartes Scouts are prepared for engagement," Major Lucian Svard said, stepping back into the ballroom. "You don't say," Orvan replied, voice steep and unhurried. It carried the relaxed rasp of a man entirely unimpressed by theatrics. The way he spoke, it was as though he were discussing the weather rather than an impending battle. His physique was unremarkable, fit but not towering. Yet his presence had the weight of a veteran who had survived much worse than the scorn of an Imperial officer. His Arbites light power armor, marked with his martial insignia, creaked slightly as he shifted, an ornamental poncho slung back over one shoulder like a cape. He barely looked up from his data slate. Svard's lip curled in disgust. "I find your posture rather unfit for the circumstances, Marshal." His voice was measured, clipped, each word precise, like the stroke of a calligrapher's pen. His lean form remained stiff, his shoulders squared, as though he were standing for an inspection. Owen flicked a glance at him, bored. "That so?" He continued scrolling. Svard took a step forward, voice low and sharp. "You are responsible for all the losses on these colonies. You commanded 20,000 men and failed to prevent the raids. No coordinated reconnaissance, no security cordons, not even a single successful countermeasure. You let the enemy come and go as they pleased, and worse, you let the corruption fester in your ranks." He let the words hang between them. "Now we are left to clean up your mess." Owen finally put his data slate down, resting it on the rim of the holomat console. "Well, Major Svard," he said, stretching the vowel mockingly, the R's drawling with exaggerated emphasis. His tone was one of mild amusement. "You've known all that since your briefing a month ago. Off-planet." The implication was clear. Svard had been briefed about the situation while in advance, but now, at the precipice of battle, he was only now voicing his outrage, like a woman clutching his pearls before the fight had even begun. The muscles in Svard's jaw tensed, his nostrils flaring. "You should concern yourself with your position, Marshal, and pray that this operation succeeds. Otherwise, if you survive this day, your name will echo through every sector precinct, and not in praise," he exhaled sharply. "Were you under my command, you would have been stripped of your station and flogged for incompetence." Owen smirked, the thick black of his walrus mustache barely concealing the amusement in his face. "Then I thank the Emperor for her small mercies." Svard scoffed. "You wouldn't last a day in the guard." Owen shrugged and bonded, rolling his shoulders under his poncho. "I reckon I manage, though I suspect I'd have to suffer through a whole lot more speeches." He gave Svard a pointed look before pushing off the console. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Major, I got men to see to." Svard's fingers twitched toward his belt, itching for the hilt of his sword. The insolent dog. Had this been the guard, such failure would have seen him executed, if not by a firing squad, then by Svard's own hand. Instead, his Marshal of the Court saw fit to leave this man in command. A disgrace. Senior arbitrator Varric Osgard stood in the shade of a false front food supply building, arms crossed over his armored chest, his eyes constantly scanning the street. His arbitrators, spread through the foe settlement, were the only ones in the operation playing themselves, though much of their more lethal equipment was tucked out of sight. To the casual observer, they carried nothing but suppression shields and shot mauls, tools meant for handling rowdy settlers, not efficient against Xeno slavers. He exchanged silent glances with nearby arbitrators and voxed his squad leaders, his proctors, positioned across the settlement. Some stood with their cyber mastiffs, hulking, mean-spirited brutes of metal and muscle, the augmatic jaw strong enough to rip the doors of an armored transport. From the corner of his eye, he caught the unmistakable approach of a thick-framed Arbites sandbike, its V6 engine purring low and deep. The wide-brimmed helmet, the billowing beige poncho, and the casual posture of the rider gave his identity away before he even rolled to a stop. Marshal Rask Owen. Varric straightened instinctively, snapping to attention as the vine pulled up, the heavy scent of Pranithian thick in the air. "At ease, arbitrator," Owen muttered over the rumble of the engine. "Ain't no need for that." "Yes, sir," Varric relaxed, though only slightly. Owen killed the engine with a practiced flick, kicked the stone and swung himself off the saddle. The marshal turned his face skyward, squinting toward the sun before pressing a button on his own. His visor slid up, revealing dark-tied eyes beneath thick brows. "Damn heat," he grunted. "I reckon we could cook eggs on our armor plates." A smirk turned at the corners of his mustache. Varric wanted to laugh alone, to let that casual ease settle into his bones, but his years of harsh drilling had beaten the instinct from him. His response came crisp, precise. "How can I be of assistance, sir?" Owen let out a short chuckle, shaking his head. "Bah! I feared I'd take a ride before that place drained the life out of me. Major Svard ain't exactly what I'd call a good company." "I'm sorry to hear that, sir. I was told he was highly competent." "Oh, he's competent, all right. Just a bit too wound up, if you ask me." He drew the last words out, letting them hang. Varric said nothing. He wanted to be a man who could match Boven's rhythm, but he wasn't built for it. He stood there, stiff, waiting. Ovenik sobbed, sharply, ridding the silence for what it was. "Listen, lad. We're sure in deep shit, Boren, my Gothic." He glanced at Varric as if expecting for a protest. He got none. "I know it ain't entirely our fault. We were stretched thin, real thin. What a bad batch of arbitrators, too. Young, green, no experience, no killer instinct." His voice dropped a fraction. "But here, soon, here's where we set things right." Owen tapped a knuckle against Varric's breastplate, the gesture surprisingly firm. "You and Asks, boys. You're the best I got. You got the training, the gear, and you've seen more than your share of real fights. This ain't some Beck what arrived. This is it." He straightened slightly. "So you be your best, son, 'cause it ain't just my neck in the noose." Varric's lip curved slightly, his voice as steady as a bolter's retort. "We will give those dove filth nightmares." Owen gave an awkward chuckle, shifting slightly in his stance. "Emperor willing, Lyle, Emperor willing. I'll tell you what, I'd give a month's officer rations to be down here fighting beside y'all. But the damn brass wouldn't have it. Gotta be there holding the line with the senior officers." He grunted, the thought clearly bothering him. "'Twould be an honor to fight beside you, sir." "No, say, it'd be all mine." With that, he lowered his visor, swung himself back into the bank, and gunned the engine. The fork servers whined softly as he turned the heavy machine back toward the command post. Varric watched him go, something stirring in his chest. How could a man with that much history, that much responsibility, still be like that? Still so calm, still so damned human. He let out a slow breath and clenched his fists. He would make Owen proud. He would restore the honor of the first Orquelian Arbites corpse, even if it cost him his life. A hulking sea scout sat alone in the vast, irregular chaparral, the landscape stretching unbroken in every direction. Horizon to horizon, there was nothing but the dense shrubland, with only the occasional Olean or Seratonian tree breaking their monotony. The air was briny, thick with salt, and even with mortal ears, the distant crash of the sea carried far across the land, mixed with piercing calls of Larigaean birds. Haldarek Ishtaros was seated beneath the shade of a lone Seratonian tree, feeling the sunburns on his exposed skin fade as his in-house physiology repaired itself. His carapace was Caribbean green, like his power-armored brothers, an armor he wore for many decades as a grey mariner. Most veterans of the Sea Scouts had, choosing the ways of stealth, sabotage, and reconnaissance over the brutal hammer blows of frontline warfare instead. Theirs was the unseen hunt, the art of slipping into the shadows, striking deep and vanishing before the enemy knew their doom had come. Unlike most scouts of other chapters, he did not wear a body glove beneath his armor. Instead, he wore a sleeveless Abyssalian tunic, its fabric ending just above the knee, the hand cut into a jetty curve at the sides, longer at the front and back. The deep blue of the garment matched the vast oceans of his own world, patterned with simple lines of red and white. Each scout's tunic was different, personal, an echo of the towns, cities, or wild territories from which they had come as mortal men. His boots had been modified from Grok's hide combat footwear, were shaped to resemble tall, open sandals, better suited for balance and speed than the heavy footfalls of standard boots. His hair, streaked with the first signs of grey, was knotted at the back of his head, keeping it from falling into his face with the wind or some movement. Seated there, he toyed absent-mindedly with his combi bolter with an underslug grenade launcher, switching between fire notes, safing and unsafing. His fingers rocked the weapon mechanically, each motion practiced and unconscious. A warrior's idle habits. As he worked, his mind drifted. Familiarity breeds belonging. He had only been on Aquila's 9 for 3 weeks, yet the land already felt like an idealized version of his own world, a world less scorned by Abyssali's violent tides, more tranquil and hence more beautiful. That thought alone ignited a deeper instinct, the drive to protect it. He knew in the end that such efforts would only serve the galactical elite, while the common imperial citizen would endure a life of toil, suffering and brutal war. That was the way of the Imperium. But the All-Father's will was beyond mortal sight, and though it seemed their struggles served only the honorless, there was meaning in it, a higher purpose that time itself would reveal. Then came the vox click.
Haldarek, what's your status?
The voice was Tarkam's. Haldarek pressed his eyelids together for a moment, as if clearing his mind from the pull of his own thoughts. His fingers hovered over the bead at his ear before he keyed the channel. Shamses are in place, Sergeant. Just taking a break.
You should hurry up, brother. You're still far out, and we don't know when they'll come for us.
There was a pause, a dry chuckle.
They're still faster than you.
Haldarek smiled, shifting his weight as he flexed his fingers. I'll be there in 20. If they find me first, I'll give them hell.
I don't doubt it. Just don't take too long.
Of course. The channel clicked shut. Haldarek rose smoothly to his feet, rolling his shoulders as he stretched out the last traces of stiffness. His sunburns had already healed, a minor damage corrected in minutes. He then slung his combi bolter across his back, securing it tight before setting off. He moved like a prowling panther, his gait fluid as he twisted, sprinted, and vaulted over brush and uneven terrain. He chose his paths carefully, instinctively finding the cleanest route through the chaparral, avoiding sharp turns and unnecessary exertion. Every movement was controlled, tight, precise. His arms and torso twisted powerfully with each step, his footfalls lined despite his near 2-meter, 200-kilo frame of reinforced bone, dense muscle, and artificial organs. His speed was unnatural even by Astartes standards. At this pace, even the fastest predators of Aquila's 9 would struggle to keep up. And if the enemy was watching, they would see a shadow racing toward them. Second in command, veteran scout Etheron Zovanak, and neophyte Zekronis Lukapal, a promising prospect for the mount of the Fleet Lord, walked alongside Imperial Guard heavy weapons teams, autocannons and heavy stowers, camouflaging their positions. The work started before sunrise, earthen mounds raised and firing pits dug. Now the final touches were being laid. Coordinates woven with strips of native flora were draped over the weapons, blending seamlessly into the terrain nearly imperceptible from a distance. The mortal guardsmen moving between the towering Astartes looked like children scrambling around giants. Though Zachromes was still only halfway through his journey to full ascension, he was already beginning to match the Arders in height. His growth had come quickly, but the final thickening of his frame, the coiling of muscle, and the battle-hardened weight of decades was yet to come. Only then, and only after proving himself through fire and blood, would he earn the right to don the full power armor of his chapter and claim his place as a serf javelin, the first rank of the Sea Raiders. And if he survived long enough, instead of ascending to Grey Marina, he would be honored with the mantle of Liege Lord, the chapter's revered warrior madix. For now he was learning a trade from his elders, and by all accounts, his future was bright. "We better hurry up, boss," the cronies called over to Etheron. Like the other veteran ex-Grey Mariners among the Sea Scouts, Etheron was well into the grey years of a life that had stretched past a century. His body bore the signs of endless campaigns, scar tissue thick as armor, skin marked by ritual in war, and the protrusions of black carapace nodes running down his arms and calves, each a physical mark that separated him from the neophyte. He despised augmatics, distrusted the mechanicus, and so when he lost an eye, he had chosen the blank blast replacement rather than a cybernetic substitute. The scar that stretched across his face told the tale of its loss, a vicious, flesh-tearing stripe from the clawed hand of a demonette many decades ago. A scar that had become the source of endless jest. The running joke among his brothers was that he had been too distracted by the demon's bare female chest, that the old father himself had seen fit to punish his lapse with the blade across the face. It was a joke that never quite amused Etheron, and more than once he had laughed a brother sprawling for making it within arm's reach. He glanced up from his work, tugging gently at the camel net to check his hold. "Yes, we do, brother Lukapau," he said in his usual deep, deliberate voice, a voice that always sounded like it was speaking a sacred truth, even when discussing the length of twigs. "Sergeant Trelamus already foxed me, asking about brother Ishtaros." He shook his head, amused. "Patience is a virtue our sergeant has yet to master, even in his venerable age, and clearly he does not know our brother Ishtaros." The cronies raised a brow. Etheron gave the net one final pull. "He's never late." A tall halberd trader, nearly as tall as an Astartes, though only with a fraction of the mass in weight, approached with 2 other men in tow. His armor was standard Arbites plate, but his armor bore a distinctive aquila, flanked by synthetic plumes of bright color, marking him as a proctor. His stride was firm, his voice clipped and professional. Proctor Caros Hesk. "Sir," Hesk said without preamble, "Marshal Owen Vopstin ordered us to put ourselves at your disposal." He spoke without hesitation, his discipline matching that of his counterpart, senior harbour trader Varric Osgard. "What are your orders, sir?" Etheron took a moment, lost in thought. He had no true understanding of what it was to face the horrors of the galaxy as a near mortal, to stand against inhuman speed and strength with nothing but flesh and will. All he knew was the way of the Sea Raiders, to shoot, thrust, slash, kick, and crush with the might of a transhuman warrior. And yet he could not help but admire the bravest among these men, those who fought with nothing but grit and duty, who stood their ground even as death clawed at them, bleeding out yet refusing to fall until their very last heartbeat. "Very well, harbour traitor," he said, his voice solemn. "Your man will provide aid to the naval armsmen. They are clearly out of their element." His eyes flicked toward the cluster of voidsmen, trying and failing to conceal their discomfort in the heat. Most of them had taken refuge beneath a dry, spindly tree, their backs straight, discipline intact, but their discomfort was clear. They were not warriors of the open battlefield. They were men of the void, of steel corridors, in pressurized decks. Only logistical desperation explained their presence here. Assess their ability to maneuver in this terrain. Itheron continued, eyes locked on Hesk. If they fail your standards, provide correction. But, his voice sharpened slightly, do not forget, they are your equals. You are not the proctor. Hesk nodded. Understood, sir. He turned to his men. Luvat! The other traitors trotted away, and Itheron let out a slow breath, turning his attention to another figure nearby. Captain Theophilus Grafen. He stood at ease, his hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed his men. On the other hand, Captain Theophilus Grafen of the Guard was right at home. Unlike the Navy personnel, the Guardsmen under his command were perfectly suited for this climate. They were veterans of a decades-long desert war, hardened by an environment far harsher than this. Their flat armor was sun-colored, their undershirts almost white, loose-fitting for ventilation. Their cargo shorts were standard issue, their wide-brimmed helmets sitting somewhere between a bow and a concave disc, designed to shield them from the sun's glare. Many of them required whiteness to protect their bronzed skin, but not Graven. The man was dark as night, his skin almost impervious to the sun's radiation. His face was stone, expression unreadable, the kind of man who didn't raise his voice to command because he had never had to. But he was a mighty warrior, not a martial genius in any single discipline, but a living, breathing army knife. In his long mortal career, he had done it all. Sentinel pilot, comms specialist, Hydra artillerist, Madekine. There was little on the battlefield he had not touched, no role he had not filled when necessity demanded. Itheron did not know the man personally, since Planetfall, the reinforcing battalion under Major Svard, had yet to spill Drukhari blood. But that hour was coming, and soon Captain Theophilus Graven would have the chance to prove whether his reputation was deserved.
Captoria speaking.
Ildekar here. Need to speak with the sergeant, came the voice of the veteran scout, his accent slightly different from his brother's. He dragged his mullet off his sweaty neck, exhaling.
Right away.
A series of clicks followed before Takamu's voice cut through the channel, crisp and controlled.
Was about to fox you. What do you need?
The Rhine flak is set, dug in, camouflaged, and waiting for action. Ildekar paused, adjusting the vox screen slightly. How's Itheron's position?
They are delayed.
There was an edge of irritation in Takamu's voice. Let me guess, rather the Haldarek's still not done. It wasn't a question.
As always.
Takamu admitted, exasperation bleeding through.
But Itheron's still finalizing the firing positions too. Let's hope the Xenos don't decide to come early.
Well, once we're off this up, we'll have to sort it out. For now, I need an update on the explosive traps I set yesterday. How's the signal integrity? Takamu checked the readout, his fingers tapping the detonator's casing.
Systems green across the board, just waiting for a button press.
Happy to hear that, brother. The old father protects.
May fate lead us to victory.
A final click ended the transmission. Alderete does this all the time, came a raspy voice from the shadows behind Ildekar Thangfrekker. The Bedford turned his head slightly, glancing over his shoulder. Azamar Chandora brooded in his dark, hot corner beneath the camouflage, idly activating and deactivating his technical axe with the flick of his thumb. The weapon's power field hummed and crackled, the oscillating energy casting flickers of pale light against its sharp, shadowed features. "He needs to be disciplined," Azamar muttered, his voice the knife's edge of irritation. "Too many warnings already." "You're right in your judgment, brother, Azamar," Uldakar acknowledged, his tone measured. "But wrong in your heart." Azamar scoffed. "You shouldn't desire harm on your battle brothers and cloak it with order and discipline." Uldakar continued, eyes locked on the close-quarter battle specialist. Azamar turned his head slightly, the moving slow, deliberate. His features were gaunt, his eyes deep-set and shadowed, black pits carved into a face as stark as a weathered cliffside. His jaw was clean-shaven, though the roots of his dark mane betrayed streaks of white, the first marks of age creeping through the warrior's ears. Across his forehead, a black leather bandana was tied tight, adorned with the dried, empty shells of crustaceans arranged in angular patterns. The talismans marked him as one of the feared warriors of his native island, a brotherhood whose names carried weight in the blooded annals of Abyssalis. He wanted to answer, but his kind were not men of many words. Silence had been beaten into him since birth, a blade honed sharper than speech. He had always been more assassin than soldier, a mercenary by trade, hired blade for the warring kingdoms of Abyssalis, selling death to fill the comforts of his own land. He was born into it, had no choice. Like all firstborn sons of his people, he was taken, surrendered to the order that ruled the island, a life given so that the rest might prosper. The warriors brought back riches, crushed enemies, secured peace in blood, and in return he ordered a man in only one thing: more sons to replace the ones spent. The years he spent as a serf javelin had been torment. Reckless charges, the hunger for battle glory, wasteful, unrefined. His way of war had no place in the hammer swings of frontline slaughter. No, this chapter's path was never meant for him. But the Sea Scouts, that was different. The shadows, the long hunt, the knife in the dark, that was where he belonged. And yet, despite the years, despite his place among his brothers, there was still one thing he could not stand. Of all the people he had fought, none set worse with him than those of Uldakar's kind. Mongrels, mutts, half-bloods born of Abyssalian stock in Fenrisian lineage, the chosen of the demigods who had come from the stars, the favorite ones. Now he was one of them, a demigod himself. He knew the truth, understood the old stories, how the chapter's bloodline had been shed. But none of that lessened the disgust that had been carried to him since childhood. Still, at least Uldakar's kind was human. His hatred for Zeno is burned hotter. In demons were worse. So this was a convenient alliance. The off-worlders who had forged the Sea Raiders had given him the perfect means to sate his thirst. The blood of humanity's enemies, spilled without end. All this churned through Azamar's dark mind, his thoughts a tide of old hatreds and grudging alliances. Across from him, Uldakar held his stare, unmoving. He did not flinch, did not waver, only met the unspoken challenge with a quiet, unyielding defiance. Do it if you dare. His expression hardened, his features shifting slightly, taking on that predatory sharpness so many of his lineage bore, like a wolf baring its teeth. Then came the voice that shattered the moment. Now, no need for that, brothers. The Xenos will Keranesh Pelasgo never finished. Azamar turned on him in an instant, the power axe snapping up, its head leveled at the neophont's throat. "Shut your mouth, tightborn," he growled, voice like crushed stone, "before I test your Laraman's organ." The jest dogging Keramesh's throat, he tensed but wisely said nothing. Then the vox clicked, sharp and urgent.
Enemy spotted. At your stations.
Uldakar exhaled, defying his eyes dinning just enough to refocus. He gave Azamar one last lingering look. "We'll finish this later, brother." His voice was grave. "But now, we have more important things to do." Without another word, he turned away, switching channels on his comms unit.
"All units, report."
His voice carried through the flank as he relayed orders, calling their scattered Imperial Company officers to readiness. The storm had come, and the killing was about to begin.
"Haldarek, where in the Emperor's name are you?"
Etheron's voice came sharp and clipped through the box, barely containing frustration. Haldarek was still moving, sprinting, vaulting, his enhanced muscles and twin hearts pounding at their absolute threshold. His breath came hard and fast, each inhale dragging deep into his chest as he pushed himself beyond even Astartes' limits. "I heard," he spoke between ragged breaths. "Almost there."
"Our sensors just flagged movement. They're hitting the flames too."
Haldarek's jaw clenched. "Fuck!" If they had already bypassed this incident, that meant they were close. Too close. And no matter how fast you run, it wasn't fast enough. The Allspex in Karamesh's hand flared to life, sharp bips spiking in rapid succession. He glanced at the display, his grip tightening. "You're coming hot." "Takamo, I've just received reports from our teams. They're flanking," warned Balzel. Trelamos barely hesitated. "Let them come. We'll take care of them." His voice was steady, confident. Donatar, lying prone, sensed the unease radiating from Kurashan. The neophyte was coiled tight. His inexperience was showing. Without looking away from his coat, the old sniper spoke, his voice slow but firm. "Quell your fear, Tideburn. It doesn't suit a promising young lad like you." Kurasham stiffened. It was the first time the veteran had ever given him even a semblance of praise. "Trust your brothers. Do your part. And remember, these are Zelo's filth. They deserve only death." "Yes, sir," Kurashan answered, though his voice carried the weight of something deeper. It was his first time facing Xenos in battle. He had fought traitor guardsmen before, men who had turned against the throne, evil but still human. This was different. The Drukhari were predators, sadists, creatures beyond human corruption. All the knowledge drilled into his mind wouldn't mean anything when he was staring into the soul-eaten, laughing eyes of one of them. He exhaled, closing his eyes briefly, whispering a prayer to the Old Father. "Grant me strength, grant me focus, and grant me the chance to take as many of them with me as thou wilt allow." The Andamatar muttered something, adjusting the magnification on his scope. "Look at these sons of bitches." His voice carried an edge of amusement, but his focus was absolute. Through his lens, he tracked the approaching raiders, sleek, bladed skimmers slashing through the undulating chaparral, gliding with predatory grace. They moved as if they were swimming across the landscape, rising and falling like ocean beasts cresting waves. They were close. He needed to find the Drakon fast. They didn't even wait for sunset. His voice was a quiet scoff, half amused, half contemptuous. "Can you see him?" Takamo's voice kept through, taut with impatience. "I'm searching. I need a sec." "Takamo, it's Svard." Balzu's tone was clipped, urgent. Donatar kept his eye on the scope. Seconds were slipping away. "Sergeant Relamos, can your man take the shot?" The voice was tight with tension. Other officers leaned in, waiting. Rask over and among them, his silence heavy, his anticipation clear. All of them wanted an answer. "We're all its Major," Trelamo snapped, cutting the transmission. He turned back to Danuta, voice edged with impatience. Danuta, for Rust's sake, take the shot! The sniper let out a low growl. He stoned like a wolf protecting his skill. You're starting to piss me off, Sarge. No offense. Out in the void, near instants ago, Danuno caught the flickers on the council auspex. Brief pauses from the Censenat laid kilometers out on the flanks. Crude tools, little more than tripwire alarms with bounce, but they serve their purpose. Unlike the more sophisticated auspex arrays, these weren't so easily filled by Drukhari Emerge. Still, there was nothing else. No clear contacts. Just the familiar heat signatures of his scouts and the rest of the Imperial force. The new Nor exhaled sharply and signaled with the tilt of his head to the ship's captain, Captain Wilhelmo Forgislo. The time had come. Contact was imminent. We're on our own, Lieutenant de Nor, came the captain's voice, tinged with resignation. Commodore Falaise has no reinforcements to spare from the battle fleet. The Numo didn't hesitate. His voice was steady. We'll make ends meet, Captain. Have faith in the Old Father's will. Wilhelmo nodded slowly. I will, sure enough. His voice was soft, almost distant. As he brought a hand to his face, an anxious gesture he quickly masked. Then, without another word, he turned and strode out of the command bridge, disappearing into the long corridors of the scout sloop. Denyono remained still, watching the auspex. The storm was about to break. Haldarek kept running, though his pace had slowed. His lungs burned, muscles screaming, but he pressed on. Up ahead, he could see the area where his brothers lay hidden, though to an untrained eye, it was nothing but an unbroken sea of chaparral. The camouflage was holding, no movement, no signs of life, but he knew they were there. Then his ears picked up the sound, a faint, unnatural hum, growing louder, the whine of anti-grav engines at full speed. His gut twisted. Shit, he muttered under his breath. They're going to see me. He pushed harder, trying to squeeze more speed from his already overworked limbs, but his mind was already racing hurt. There was no way he'd reach cover before they intercepted him. But stopping wasn't an option, so he ran as hard and fast as his Astartes forged body would allow. Look who it is. The black twig I'm about to blow into oblivion. Danuta tracked his scope into the Draken's helm, its stark contour standing out even among the slick skimmers. The bastard was close now, but the terrain was working against Danuta. Uneven ground, shifting angles. He could see his target, follow his movements, but lining up a clean shot to the head or center mass was another story. Take the shots, Danuta. They're already too close. He growled through gritted teeth. I am trying. The Amel adjusted his magnoculars, his voice tight. They're almost crossing the kill strip. Danuta exhaled, steadying himself. I swear, Karakamu, after I shoot this toothpick, I'm putting a round on you. The Cam was ignoring the cross and fox chatter filling his earbeak. None of it mattered. Only this shot mattered. Take the shot, damn it! Danuta's gaze locked onto the dragon. You're mine, filth. The reticle jittered slightly over the Xeno's leader's head as the raider skimmed forward. It was now or never. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, its heavy bolt round igniting as it spiraled through the rifled barrel. The air cracked, but the round was already gone, faster than sound itself. The warning shot, the death scream of the round, would come too late. The dragon wouldn't even hear it before it was upon him. Haldarek glanced over his shoulder. black dots against the blue sky, too distant to identify, but close enough to set his blood boiling. If I can see them, they can see me. Then the world jolted, his footing vanished, and he was gone. The bolt tore through the sky, covering nearly 2 kilometers in an instant, before it struck. Impact. Destruction. The target was torn apart.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter. What fate awaits Haldarek? Was he captured so close to home? Am Danutar, did his shot find its mark against the villainous Draken? Is Arzamar truly determined against his Scout brothers? And what of orphans Arbites? Will they reclaim their honor in this operation? Stay tuned and help me bring this tale to its epic conclusion, brothers. Praise the Emperor, and I'll see you in the next transmission.